Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, everyone. This is the first The I Am Collective podcast, and it's been a long time coming. I'm pretty excited to get this show on the road. And
Yes.
this is Samuel Lepine, our creative director. Actually, wait, I guess I should introduce myself first. But my name is Miguel Amario. I am the co-president, for those of you that don't know. I feel like, for the most part, anyone that's going to be watching this thing kind of has an idea of who we are. But we're a new club on campus, and we focus a lot about mental health, but something that you're going to come to learn about us through the show and everything that we're going to be doing is that mental health is very unique, and we tackle it in a very different way. So to get things started, we kind of just want to do something wrong. And the best way to do that is to do it super unscripted, and that's what we're doing right now. So if it sounds like we don't have anything planned, it's because we have nothing planned. So, Sam, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. What can I tell you about myself? I'm an artist. I consider myself an artist. I enjoy doing art quite a bit. You're, of course, aware of this.
Yeah.
And it's telling of my position as creative director. I'm very, very interested in a wide range of topics. I enjoy speaking and having dialogue and discourse with a variety of people, and seems like a perfect place to do that.
Yeah, so Sam is a very unique and colorful individual, to say the least. Everything back here is Sam's art, actually.
Yeah, even the bike.
Yeah, the bike is obviously Sam's art.
I did not make the bike. I wish I did, though. It's a very nice bike.
Do you bike often?
No. I used to when I was younger. I with Ryan and all those guys, my childhood friends, we were in very close proximity to each other, and we spent quite a bit of time biking. But everyone's doing adult stuff now, and they're all busy, and it's hard to find time for stuff like that. I didn't get that much in over the summer, but yeah. I find other ways to keep myself active, I think.
Yeah. Well, like a lot of my friends bike, and it sounds like a weird thing to get stuck on, but a lot of people really thoroughly enjoy the act of biking. And I know it's a super efficient and clean way to travel, but it's never been something that's been pleasing for me. Like, just personally, I don't see the concept of enjoying biking.
Well, you're definitely a super physical dude. Like, you lift and you do sports and everything like that. So, but I guess everyone has their specific tastes when it comes to physical exertion. But no, biking is... I think the key with biking is the enjoyment you get out of it, as in the act of being on, this metal frame going at 40 miles an hour or something like that, counteracts you kind of forget that you're even working out at all. Which is what in some cases is optimal, because it's like swimming in that regard. Like when I was my parents always used to take me swimming when I was a kid, and for me it wasn't an activity at all. It was just me, going out and having fun with friends and stuff like that. But at the same time, it was very, very good for me. I wish I swam more. Same with biking, I think.
So, if you couldn't tell, Sam is a very big, in your head kind of person, and I think I am as well. Like,
can you elaborate?
Well, like, okay, when I say an in your head kind of person, there is like the obvious label of introvert and extrovert. A lot of people think that like an extroverted person is just someone who's very good at talking and will constantly talk, but it's actually, at least from my understanding of it, has a lot more to do with how you approach situations. And like, I'm a very naturally introverted person. It's my ability to talk mostly comes out of like a self-taught and kind of evolving mindset. And for the most part, I like to think that when I speak, I kind of put a lot of weight behind the words that I say. And like in doing that, a lot of the actions and events in my life that I hold really close to me, I take very personally. And that comes back to a mental health thing, because I take myself pretty seriously, as relaxed as I can come off sometimes. I think it's a very planned, like, relaxation. It's weird because, like, people like that, people like us, don't really understand that as a good thing.
Yeah. I think people fall into the extroverted, introverted dichotomy a little bit. Though there is a third one. I think it's called like a ambivert or something like that, where it's some synthesis between the two. But it's the same with. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's the same with zodiac signs, where there are people, and even like psychoanalysis, where you have these like the big 5 traits and everything, and people want to designate their personality to like these titles, and in a way, the title itself almost impacts the way that they operate in life, rather than their own actions defining the classification. It's strange, but yeah, it's pretty consistent for the most part. I think you can nail down when someone's either extroverted or introverted pretty easily. Though sometimes it's less obvious. It's a little more ambiguous.
Do you think that you're born to act a certain way?
Ooh, nature versus nurture.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's a really big subject, obviously, but like it's something that I've kind of gone back and forth with, and I feel like the more you kind of meet people, the more those ideas get challenged all the time, and that's with any sort of belief or opinion, or et cetera, et cetera. But if you really think about it, there's a lot of recorded, socially accepted traits that people believe are just kind of born onto you.
Right.
Like we talked about the zodiac sign, we've talked about like introvert, extrovert, all these like labels, for the lack of a better term.
Right.
Labels. And for the most part, you're right. It's a lot of people just acting underneath what they believe they are already.
And what they've have applied to them socially. So on to the nature versus nurture question. It's obvious that people are shaped by their environment to a degree, right? Because we're social animals. We are impacted by the people who surround us, the physical conditions, et cetera, et cetera. That shapes our beliefs, and how we act, and how we think, and how we work through different problems. But the deeper question is there a part of us that isn't constructed in that way? That's intrinsic. That was there always, or instinctual, you could say. Something that was kind of in the core, fundamental, like foundations of a human being. I personally believe that we have intrinsic differences and things like that. Just because we've existed as these animals for so long that we've had to evolve in a way where we have these traits that are kind of they're stuck in kind of our.
Bio's not my field, but
neither. No.
It's Darwinism, but it's natural selection. There's certain traits that just survive, right? And I wonder how much that has to do with your not necessarily your psychological self, but more so like the aspects that make you you. How much of that survive because they're just better traits? Because we're definitely okay. So big opinion time.
Yeah.
I think that. As a animal, the human race has kind of stunted their growth.
Right.
And a lot of people will say, well, the next course of evolution has to be technological.
Yeah.
And we will adapt that way. But we also live in a time where there is someone for everyone. And the fact of the matter is, people like to fuck all the time. So there's people there that are gonna just carry on all these traits. Like, you can be a bad person and still have kids. There are people that exist that are like that. And not necessarily saying that being a bad person is something that's translated.
Right.
There's something that you can inherit from your parents.
So, with the nature-nurture thing, interesting experiment. During I think it might have been the Cold War or some period in time, I'm not 100% sure. There was a Russian series of experiments directed towards infants, where you would have infants who were, if you're into psychology, you probably are semi-familiar with this experiment, but they essentially took infants from their parents and they isolated them. And they had 2 groups of infants. One where they received human contact and everything that they needed to survive, and one where they received everything that they needed to survive, but no human contact whatsoever. They were administered through intravenous, stuff like that. There was as little human interaction as possible. And even though the group of babies that had no human interaction, even though they had everything that they required to survive, they just died. They just died, and they hypothesized that it's so valuable. The human interaction is so valuable in our in our development that it's actually required to sustain life. Now, if you really wanted to prove that, you'd have to recreate the experiment, but we're not going to do that because we have
that can't be
ethics
a thing.
and all that. Though that is not to say that there isn't sketchy experiments happening under the surface all the time. I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
I certainly don't. But yeah, sort of tangent. An interesting event that happened where, nurture is definitely a massive part of how a human develops.
So, I want to kind of dig into the person you are, Sam. Like,
sure. Yeah.
For the lack of a better phrase. So your mode of expression has been art and a lot of visual art. So kind of just take me through how that kind of surfaced for you and what everything that you try to create represents for you.
So I guess I can start off with how I got into art. I was always interested in visual art in particular. I found it much more interesting than my classes or anything like that. Though I think that was accentuated by the fact that from a very young age I was on Concerta and methylphenidate and Ritalin, et cetera, and so I had all this reserve creative energy that I needed to explore, and essentially that manifested itself as me just essentially doodling all the time, especially in class. I never gave a rat's ass about what the teacher was, going on about. It was all about kind of me occupying myself creatively. And so that was extremely important formatively for kind of my artistic development. And that just I just stuck with it. And I was always sketching all throughout, elementary school and junior high and high school. And obviously to this day, and it's developed to this point where I have this very deep need to create things that I can be proud of. And it is way more for me than it is for the people who, the enjoyment that I get from it is paramount. The enjoyment that other people get from it is amazing, and I enjoy it. I love to exhibit my art, but it's secondary to what I want from my art, and that's my own form of therapy, my own form of kind of the slow, tedious meditation that I do, especially when working on big pieces where I can just immerse myself in the work and nothing else exists, and I'm just focused on the art. And it's it's so therapeutic for me. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have that in my life. And I think everyone has that form of meditation in their life in one form or another, whether it's, working out or internalizing, rumination.
Just kind of working, yeah.
Isn't always, working, or
a lot of people find a deep,
something that they can use to offset the inevitable suffering of existence. Anything. Now, some of those methods are way less healthy and productive than others. I think art's pretty healthy overall, but there's certainly many other arguably more effective ways to cope, I think.
Would you say that you're proud of the work you've done? And I mean that super, if you were to reflect on all the work, because for me, I read a lot of poetry,
right,
and writing has been kind of my method of expression. So to me, it seems as though a lot of what I create has sort of painted a picture. Yeah? And if I take a step back, I can say, oh, I'm proud of all the work that I've done. But when I take a step back, I don't know. I'm not sure. At least that's something that I'm having a current dilemma about. Is that if I were to look back at what I've kind of painted myself out as a person through my art, am I proud of that? Right. And I feel like a lot of people who create things with this kind of attitude in their own mind, as this is my venue of release. It is therapy, and it is cathartic, and I use the word cathartic very deliberately, because I feel like when I write anything, I sort of have mounted a lot of weight to it in my head, and just kind of writing it all out puts the weight off, and I'm like, that is a part of me that I just needed to release in some way, and now I have it there. And
you're actualizing it in like something that's real and something that isn't just in your head. Now it exists somewhere else, and you can kind of offload whatever baggage associated with it kind of into that physical space. With your question whether I'm proud, I think I'm proud. I'm not satisfied though. I am perpetually dissatisfied with just about everything. About everything that I've ever created. And that's important, because if I was satisfied, then there's no reason for me to continue to expand or create or improve upon myself artistically, because I'd be good to go. It's like dissatisfaction is the catalyst to any form of improvement. Like if humans were satisfied, if we were happy, there would be no reason for us to create fire or,
do anything.
Or like innovate or do anything, because you have to be dissatisfied in the first place to achieve any form of actualization. It's built into it, and like every artist can relate to that. Like you make something and it doesn't necessarily line up with the vision that you had for it, or maybe there's something about it that you're trying to emulate and you just can't because you're incapable, or maybe your ideals are such a potent judge that you can't live up to them, and they're always higher than your capabilities. But it's important you can't let that get to you, obviously. It's important to...
At least not too much.
I think Jordan Peterson, one of his rules is compare yourself to who you were yesterday other than who someone else is today. So instead of looking at other people and comparing yourself to them, look at your own process, look at your own progress in your life and say, okay, who was I a year ago? Am I better now? And if you are, then there you go. You did it. That's real progress. It's not some, crazy, celebrity ideal, you see on a talk show and you're like, God, like, why can't I be like that? It's, you have to be realistic.
You realize the work that you put into it as well.
Yeah. And you appreciate yourself more. And that's amazing for your mental health. Giving yourself some credit.
It's also one of the most dangerous things as well, though.
Yes.
Because
slippery slope.
Well, like, cause
you can always go too far.
Yeah. And like for me, when I look back and look at my motivations to get better at anything, whether it's writing or just school or sports, it's always rooted to like a deeper anxiety of like, oh, I'm not satisfied with myself. Oh, I hate myself. Oh, now I got to get better at something. And I've now associated all my weight, all my value as a person to whatever I'm doing. And it's kind of, like you said, it's a perpetual, I need to get better at this or I'm not there.
But you can kill yourself doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's another thing that I had to grapple with is like you can get caught up in that stuff. You build a torture house in your brain, just like this, like running these things over and over again, especially with, I think the biggest one is regret and guilt. If sort of take off from what you were saying, but like...
No, it's all rooted because whether you know it or not, you do feel everything is related to your life. No matter every action that you willingly and autonomously take is an action to or against your life, whether you know it or not. And there's a bunch of like philosophical comparisons to this. Like I forget who actually does go in and talk about the idea of micro lives and micro deaths. It's almost like that
might have been you. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's like a metric that they associate to the actions that you do. Right. And basically, in very layman's terms, and by someone who hasn't done the adequate research about this, it sort of amounts every decision that you make as a functioning and lucid human being is an action for or against yourself, to some degree. Yeah.
I think it was Jung who compared it to a rebirth, as whenever you encounter an outside axiom that's incompatible with the axioms that you already have, all the conventions and your ideas of who you are as a person, that part of you has to die in order to be reborn while integrating that kind of new interaction. But it kind of goes into the micro macro.
Are you the same person that you were 10 years ago?
Certainly not.
You don't think so?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it depends what you mean by same person. I'm Sam.
Mm-hmm.
I'm that ego, like Samuel. That name that I associate everything that I think who I am with. But one of the things that I realized when I went off the Ritalin was that I had attributed certain characteristics of myself to my ego. Mm-hmm. And when I went off the Ritalin, those weren't there anymore. Like I remember I read voraciously all the time. Like I could not read enough because I was on Ritalin. I was basically on amphetamines. And then once I went off, that kind of thirst that was not satiated ever, it kind of began to dim and waver, which I miss to a degree, but now I actually have to force myself to immerse myself in a book. But that was a key component of who I thought I was. Mm-hmm. And it was just, it died. And so, like, you can say that I'm the same person, but in a lot of ways, I think people change quite drastically over time. Maybe there's deep parts of the ego or of the self that are much more foundational and that can't be changed so much, especially when they happen. If it's like a nurture, if it's something in your environment that impacts you at a very young age, maybe you can't change that as easily, maybe in 10 years, 20 years. But there are certainly aspects, large, significant aspects that change. Mm-hmm. And again, like I haven't gone into heavy research or anything like that. I'm a layman. I'm very, I'm not super read on all of these topics, particularly like Jung. Like I don't think anyone, very, very few people have an understanding of Jung and Freud and all these very influential thinkers. We can get basic ideas of what they were talking about, but like, God, it's so powerful that it's like, yeah.
Like
you have to approach it with a little bit of humility because
that's well, to me, whenever I approach something that I need to learn, or not necessarily need to learn, but something that I want to learn, you always have to take it with a grain of salt. It's almost like a self-doubt. Whenever you kind of interpret or try to learn new things, you always have to realize that everything you're seeing could be proven wrong tomorrow.
Right.
And that it's a way just to ensure that you continuously learn. And that's kind of an approach I picked up as a kid, because as a kid I was very aware that I did not know anything about anything.
Yeah. Assume that you do not know anything at all. There's a word for these. I can't remember what, but there's certain assumptions that they're not necessarily true, but if you assume that they're true, they're actually extremely helpful. So a good example is assuming that a gun is always loaded, right? If you give a gun to anyone who knows anything about a gun,
they're gonna think it's
they're gonna check, and they're gonna keep checking it, and even then
they won't point it at you.
They will never point it at anyone. And that's the safest way to operate. That's the safest way to operate with a firearm. Obviously, you don't point it at people. So even if it's not true, even if you do know some stuff or you think you know some stuff, it's better to assume that you don't know anything. Because like you said, you can always learn, and maybe it humbles you a little bit. And to a degree, you could say that you think you know some stuff, but hey, we could just be brains in jars or something. Exactly. This could all be simulated. But
I had this thought like a time ago, where basically, there's a lot of parts, just to bring it back to have you changed in 10 years. there's a lot of parts of myself that have changed. Of course, I've matured in a lot of different ways, but in a lot of ways, I'm still like a dumbass. I'm a very big dumbass. And I think like I've sort of carried that into my adulthood, and a lot of people don't realize like, hey, yeah, you're still only 20. You know, like I feel really old a lot of times, but I'm still only 20.
We're still kids, man.
There's still so much you need to see. And
yeah.
a lot of people take themselves so seriously, and that leads to dissatisfaction. And that leads to building anxiety. And I think like just kind of the world that we're in now with social media, everyone kind of has an audience. And whether you like it or not, you're weighing yourself against your peers. So for me, I always felt stupid. And I was born in the Manila, and I moved to Singapore when I was like about 3 and lived there for a period of time, and I moved to Canada. And the biggest transition I experienced from Singapore to Canada, and it's something that I didn't know as a kid at all, had no interpretation of or understanding of, was how much more forgiving the education system is here. And how...
Is it quite different?
It's a lot. Oh my goodness. We were expected in my last year of school in Singapore, which was primary 3.
Right.
I was in... They didn't call it grades. I'm not sure what they call it now. But I was in primary 3, which is the equivalent of grade 3 in Canada, and I guess in North America. And we were expected to long divide with 2 numbers. And it's shit that I haven't been able to do now. Like as an adult, I can't long divide by 2 numbers.
Higher standards at a younger age.
And it's of course it improved. It made them all super smart. But I always felt stupid compared to that. And that's kind of how I've always measured intelligence. So then,
but like...
And then when I moved here, there's a lot more of a appreciation for just how you can express yourself, and whether that be art, just doing like the concept of having like a very opinion-based language program where like when you're here from grades like 3 or basically grades 10 to, or sorry, backtrack more, from grade 7 to about grade 12, you're kind of expected to talk a lot about how you see things.
Right.
And it's interesting how that's a focus for our education system. And it's pretty cool in that way. And it does allow a lot of different avenues for thinking. Because I've seen what the other side looks like, and it's not easy.
Yeah, well, I think we're just more maybe individually oriented. Like we're interested in the individual node rather than kind of in a more collective sense.
I guess so, yeah.
I think that's certainly a Western kind of thing. Like I think that there's a lot of foundation in that in Western society, where it's kind of the individual, which is often criticized, particularly economically. But that's a whole other conversation, I guess. But definitely in the education system, I can agree with you in saying that it seems like it was more individually oriented. I mean, my education was, oh man, that was, even in elementary school, I was very, very, I guess, volatile. I don't know, I was a mischief maker. I liked to climb support beams, and, you know, I remember I mooned class one time, and I'd like fight the teacher and stuff. And my journey in education was very, very strange. I got expelled from my elementary school in grade 5. I brought a knife to school. I didn't do anything with it. I didn't intend to, but I had a record beforehand, and that was enough where, you know, they were kind of all done with that, essentially. And then I moved to multiple junior highs. I think by the time I was in high school, I'd been to 5 schools before then. Just very, very strange. But I think this is going more into kind of my own journey, particularly with mental health. But I went to an institution called William Roper Hall in Calgary, and it was a reformatory school, and there was a lot of really tough kids there. Kids who were way worse off than I was, because, you know, my parents were always supportive of me, but there were kids who they basically just dropped off there, and they were on their own, essentially. They lived in a group home there, and there's a lot of really bad drug addiction, cocaine, stuff like that. And I was only like most of us were only like 14 or 15. And so
Jesus Christ.
it was, and before then I was very, very big problem with authority, stuff like that. I never took anything too seriously, and I was very spiteful, particularly to my own environment and the world, which is common. It's a common sign of angst and stuff like that. But it was accentuated by the experiences that I had, and my outlook on society was very, very negative. So that manifested itself as kind of a destructive behavior and stuff like that. But I went to this school and I looked around me, and they had, bars on their windows and these isolation rooms and all these kids who were way, way less privileged than I was in the environment that I grew up in with the help that I was. And that was a major turning point for me, where I had to look at my situation realistically and basically force myself to get my act together. And yeah, no, that was crazy. And I got out of that. So you can stay there. You could stay at William Roper Hall from grade 1 to grade 12. And because they decided when you left.
Okay.
Right? I remember I got out within a year, because that was the big thing for me, where I was like, I can't.
The turnover was probably pretty high. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I can't keep doing this. I want to get out of this hellhole. So there's a lot of incentive. But when I got out, they gave me a big check. I took a photo with a big cardboard check for like $200. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that they were paying me
to get out of
the school.
I guess it would be like it would be an expensive program.
Oh, it was so strange, but it was extremely important for me.
I had kind of a similar experience, of course, not to that degree.
Yeah.
Like I was fortunate enough to kind of really internalize a lot of how I saw the world, and I wasn't much I did act out in ways, but I feel like I've always had a bone for self-preservation. So it was always like, yeah, I kind of want to do some stupid shit, but I also I want to see something for myself. And I feel like that's something that a lot of kids don't figure out right away. Is that, like, you have to realize that everything you're doing is for you. And that's something that I've always had growing up, and something that my parents instilled in me. But when I had a very, not per se rough childhood, but I had a very mischievous upbringing, as the more smart people would say. But basically, a lot of my outlet, or a lot of my outward expressions were angry. And whenever I was dealing with a lot of things, my number one reaction was just to be super angry. And so my parents put me into like an anger management class for like, I went to one session and I realized how many fucked up kids there are. They're just angry and like super fucking angry. And one of my most distinct memories is I sat down and they were the people that were running the program were trying to show like useful ways to outlet anger. So they were showing like how to punch a pillow, like how to write it down and throw it away, like some like things that you'd come to learn like looking into it, just kind of Google searching top result kind of stuff. And the one kid, because kids talk about a bunch of fucked up shit, and people don't realize that, but kids talk about fucked up. I talked about fucked up shit as a kid.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think I swore and said more vulgar stuff when I was in third grade way more than I do now.
For sure.
Because it's like you're playing with new toys, right? These are these things that are kind of taboo.
Yeah.
And you get your hands on them.
And your parents aren't there.
And your parents aren't there.
Yeah, you can go
So, it's kind of like, ooh, there's this kind of special, power that these words and concepts carry, mixed in with, standard childlike immaturity. But that was definitely, I would say, the case. It's just... And like, so one of these kids, sorry to... Yeah, no.
Just to go back to it, just one of these kids was talking about how he really wanted to, like, just attack his parents, and it came off like super violent. I was probably in like the 4th or 5th grade, and it was just a disturbing concept to me to just like be violent towards your parents.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest thing that calls a lot of kids back too, is just seeing that there's more fucked up kids. But if you think about it, using other things as examples of how not to be is such a puzzling thing. That's something that only humans do. You know?
Yeah, it's tricky because those other people aren't you.
Mm.
You're you.
And that's a very individual
And that's
thing.
a very, like, there's some stuff going on that is very, very, I think we share a lot of attributes as humans, but I think when it comes down to it, people have an extreme amount of variety in their own internal mechanisms and stuff like that, individual to individual. So that's why you go to therapy because you can't understand everything that you are. You can only understand a part of it because there's all these other components at play. You need someone else to come in and bring it out of you and force it out of you. Not force. Force is it has bad connotation. Someone who can bring that part of you forward to where you can confront it. But
kind of nurture it out.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. You know what? Back to the nurture thing. Now that I think about it, maybe my destructive tendencies were intrinsic because even in preschool, I remember vividly plugging all of the bathroom sinks. I was like 4 or 5 and turning them on. But I don't think that's a me. I think that might be a human condition.
Curiosity thing.
Yeah. Because I think everyone kind of has that little part of them that thrives on chaos and kind of that little devil on the shoulder that likes that mischief. And then like throwing a wrench into the machine just to see what would happen. Because it's interesting. It's not boring. George Orwell believed that if we could create a perfect society, a utopia, all of humanity would tear it down just so that something interesting would happen. So that was his belief. I think there's some truth to that, where people want to, mix things up a bit.
Yeah, and I think like if we go back to the labeling thing, and like it's super early in the conversation,
right?
But a lot of attributes that kids have, I think one thing that really kind of affects how a kid grows up is how seriously they're taken by their parents. And that's something, when I go back to, was I the same person 10 years ago? I think largely I am. My approach to life hasn't really changed. Like, I'm still curious. I'm still really stupid. And a lot of the time, my experimentation with the world around me has kind of been out of curiosity, like you've said. And
of course, yeah.
Like, something that I was kind of playing around with is that when people look at problem children and kind of disregard what they're saying, not even necessarily problem children, but even average children, and then they associate how they're acting with some big end goal. It's almost like, hey, if you keep biking without your helmet, you're going to die like that kid over there who died without a helmet. And for the most part, it's a safety thing. Yeah, like, we want to make sure that we keep our own, like, 100% okay. And yeah, of course, it's safer to bike without a helmet. But, I mean, it's safer to bike with, oh my god, we came back to biking. We came full circle. It's safer to bike with a helmet. But
very true.
Yeah, it's 100% safer to bike with a helmet. But something that, like a curiosity, that you see out of a kid, like a lot of people will just attribute it to being just a problem kid.
And then you put them on meds.
Yeah, and then that's
like, oh, your
that's
kid likes
a terrifying thing.
Your kid likes to play outside a little too
and
much.
Then
give him the...
Yeah, and like...
I'm pretty biased when it comes to that, because that was kind of my situation. I think that we overdiagnose. Particularly ADHD. I think for sure. Like, you get these kids who, sure, of course they can't sit still and fucking do your, like... Of course they can't, because they're kids and they want to go do things, and they're curious, and they have this vitriol that, like, they legitimately want to go out and explore and learn about the world, but we stick them in a room, and then when they want to do that, we say, oh, you can't focus, you're not interested, you're disinterested, here's some pills.
Yeah,
I think that's horrible. I think we're going to see long-term repercussions of that in the near future from the amount of just medication that we're prescribing, especially to children. Because, like, we don't understand
ourselves,
the long-term and ourselves.
Like, yeah,
like, what's the ramifications of doing something like that? we certainly didn't predict the opioid crisis. No, there was morphine in cereal in the 1940s or 1920s or whatever. Like, and now so there is a disconnect between what's important now and what's important in the future.
Nature or nurture. Kind of also ties into that.
We're pretty, yeah.
Are you kind of born like that? Because my interpretation of how a lot of ADHD is, and because I have ADHD, I have really bad ADHD.
I was diagnosed with it.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that way, but like going back and kind of thinking about it, a lot of people have ADHD tendencies now,
right?
And a lot of that is something that you develop just because of how quickly information is accessed and how quickly you kind of have to digest things, and we're a very fast reward system kind of society now. So whether you like it or not, even like kids have iPads, and that shit you just click, and then you're
another thing.
rewarded.
We don't know the long-term ramifications of being exposed to technology like that. Now maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's not, super consequential. But we've only had.
Are we crazier now?
Yeah, we were talking
before.
about this before.
Oh wow!
But we've only had these types of computers for a couple generations, less. Yeah. Way less.
Well, at least we're still expanding.
A generation.
Exponential rate.
So all these topics are quite all over the place.
Yeah.
We were jumping.
Yeah, we didn't plan any of that.
But I think that's, in some cases, it's good to structure discourse, but if it can flow naturally, then, happy. There's nothing wrong with that, I think.
Okay, so one more thing, kind of just to wrap up our first episode.
Sure, yeah.
Is I was wondering, kind of, why in your opinion don't people talk about mental health as someone who has their occasional bout with mental health issues? And like, why is that something that from your eyes, when you look at other people who hesitate to talk about it, or when you look at yourself when you hesitate to talk about it, why do you think that is the case?
I think there's a lot of reasons.
Oh.
I'll elaborate. I'll elaborate. I mean, I can only talk from my own experience, and I'm very fortunate now to be more or less mentally well. I haven't had many problems with my mental health, and I'm extremely grateful for that. I'm in a greatest spot I've ever been in life, and that's been great for me. I think some people convince themselves that they can't be helped. Mm-hmm. Some people find validation and kind of a bastille in wallowing in their own kind of sorrow, because it validates their existence to a degree. Mm. It's like, I am sad. I feel this pain.
And I can go through this because I've gone through this before.
And
exactly.
But they leave it just themselves, and it eats them up, and it spits them out and kills them. Mm. Some people just don't want to be a burden on other people, so they would rather try and deal with it themselves than trouble other people. Because maybe that's one of the reasons they're sad in the first place, is that they feel like they're a burden, like they can't pick up their own weight, and so they don't want to. Obviously, they don't want to do that anymore. But that's obviously the wrong thing to do, because then it just gets worse, and you repress it, and it bubbles under the surface, and it doesn't go away. That's not a neutral state to live like that. It will kill you if you exist like that and you don't confront it. Some people don't trust other people. They don't want to deal with other people. They dislike other people. They dislike society and the world around them. Some people think that they don't need help at all. They're perfectly fine just existing the way that they are, and their own unique mental problems. A big part was I didn't want to be a burden on people. But I had to force myself to go through the process and start talking with people so I could resolve the problems that I was going through. I mean, that's the thing that ultimately stopped me from doing a lot of very horrible things, particularly to myself, but also other people, was I knew that I was caught up in the vast amount of sadness in the world. And I was very pessimistic, very angry. And my conclusion was that if I were to do these horrible things, it would only contribute to that. And that's the opposite of what I wanted. But that's part of the reason that I didn't get help, because I didn't want to contribute.
Mm.
I didn't want to contribute to that sadness. Yeah. I didn't want to offload it onto other people. I believed that I could take it all in myself, but I couldn't, because that's not sustainable. A human being can't walk around with thousands of pounds of baggage. Mm-hmm. But again, you're a kid, right? Like, I'm saying this like I'm some I'm some old man who's past it all. It's like, no, I know for a fact that in the future, it's inevitable that there's going to be horrible things that are going to happen, and I'm going to have to deal with them.
Yeah. But, it's a strength to kind of forecast that for yourself.
You have to have the resolve to look at that and say, okay, I can do it.
And one of the biggest parts to me, I think, with, my self-discovery with it is not realizing how common it is to feel this way.
Oh.
And,
it's everyone. Everybody. And you have anxiety? Oh, so does everyone else. Of course. Anxiety is the neutral position. That's you have existed, your ancestors were in a forest, grubbing around, getting chased by animals. There was disease everywhere. People died for no reason, and no one knew what was going on. You didn't know if a cataclysm was going to happen the next day, or a famine, or whatever. Of course you were anxious. That is this is a lot of Buddhist and Taoist philosophy comes into this. Suffering is the neutral state. Mm-hmm. And I believe that to a degree. Though it's hard to say now, because that's why we live in such an amazing environment. We suffer almost nothing compared to what other people do, or what people have in the past have. Only 100 years ago, the majority of the population in North America lived in abject poverty, more or less. Very, very low standards, and now we have all of this.
Yeah, recording. We're recording ourselves talk, and that's a very weird concept to think that people 1,000 years ago had to hunt their own food. So
this has gone off on a whole tangent. Yeah. I'm not good at sticking to topics. I like to jump around. I like to think laterally.
I think kind of just pulling it back.
Yeah.
And looking at why people don't really like to talk about it. And for the most part, it is just that unawareness. Because everything is suffering, and everything is going to be suffering, because that's how life works. But it's almost comforting knowing that in advance, because you now know that the weight of everything that you do is so important, because it ultimately doesn't mean anything. And it sounds like a contradiction. It sounds like a paradox, but you have to value everything that you do, because you have no other option. When you look at it like that, no matter what, it's not going to mean anything anyways. So why not just start acting for yourself? And that's a lot of what nihilism ends up being.
Yeah.
And I think for me, going through and kind of figuring out why I hesitate to talk about it before, and how I've realized and kind of come to this conclusion that yes, we should all be talking about it, is because whether you know it or not, your experience is going to help someone else. And whether you know it or not, kind of saying it out loud is going to help you. And having this entire last 40-minute conversation is going to help you regardless. Because whether you know it or not, you might have taken something away from how me and Sam were talking. Yes. Every time I have a conversation with someone, I like to hope that I'm giving something back in some form or some degree. So in a very long and a very short, everything we just talked about is kind of what the club wants to do and what the club wants to be. And it starts with art. It started with biking. Let's be clear. This entire show started with biking. And we talked about art. We talked about fucking philosophy.
Nihilism.
And a bunch of crazy shit. Drugging kids. It's a lot. It's a lot. This thing's gone everywhere, but that's how life works. And sometimes life isn't fucking smooth, man. But the whole point is that you got to keep going every single day, because what's the alternative?
Yeah.
What is the alternative? And you can't look at that as something super depressing. You have to look at that as, I want to be the best person that I am because I don't have a choice. And I think like that sounds kind of bleak, but when I look at it and I realize that everyone is just trying to get by too, it's so comforting. Because as much as I can feel watered down with how I feel, so is my mom, so is my dad, so is probably my neighbor. Like no matter how happy someone can look, they're consistently trying to remind themselves why they do it.
I think mindset is extremely important for that. You can make the journey hell if you want. You can make it horrible for yourself if you really want. Maybe there, in a lot of cases, there's things that are out of your control that definitely contribute to your suffering. But like when it boils down to it, it's up to you whether you want to overcome that or you just give up and you just suffer. And that's your choice. But like you can have all the help in the world. You can have friends and a support group and therapists and stuff like that. But if you don't make the decision yourself to make any actual internal change, then it's not going to happen. And you'll just die. It's harsh, but it's
as
true.
Bleak as that is.
It's like if you don't make that conscious decision, then like where are you going to go? You're just going to sit in that stupor and just make life
wither
hell.
away.
Yeah.
And just like that, guys, that concludes our first episode. I'd like to thank you, Sam. Thank you for doing this
Miguel.
with me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's a big dream come true, man.
Yeah.
And Sam is our creative director. He's going to be around for a lot of other things. And we're probably going to have him back on the show. We're going to grow together, baby. And big shout out to Victor Dong, our moderator. Yeah, so Big Victor has done a lot to just kind of get the show on the road. And thank you for Sam for this lovely space.
Yeah,
all the beautiful
no problem,
art.
man.
And for yourself, of course.
Anytime.
And hopefully you guys see this soon. And as always, have a good night, have a good morning, have a good afternoon.
Peace.